On June 12, 1833, the Times of London communicated, 4 savages, 3 men and 1 woman, belonging to a tribe of Indians called Cerritos, which was almost entirely exterminated a short time back by the troops of the Republic at Uruguay, have just been brought to Paris by M. Curel. Among them is the Cacacu Vaimaca, surnamed Peru, who in 1814 entered the service at General Ortega's. 169 years later, after being exposed in the Musée de l'Homme in Paris, the remains of Cacacu, otherwise known as Vaimaca, are being returned to Uruguay. These remains are going to be buried in the National Pantheon and covered with an Uruguayan flag. Vaimaca will return home. His people belong to a long and storied history of indigenous people in Uruguay. The land of Uruguay is a diverse land with hills to the north and south, upland prairie and grasslands scattered across the land, swamps and marshes dotted in the wetlands, and palm forests protecting the fertile soil. The climate of Uruguay is a southern temperate zone, typically humid and warm throughout the country, with average temperatures between 62 Fahrenheit and 51 Fahrenheit, and rainfalls of 120 centimeters spread evenly across the country, making this rainfall and climate similar to the New England areas. The first people to inhabit Uruguay came in 9000 BC, according to carbon-14 dating of hearth features, and the last indigenous populace died out in the 1830s. Currently, Uruguay is one of the few countries in the Americas with no indigenous population left, with the only other nations like this being the Dominican Republic, Haiti, and Grenada. These indigenous populations tragically were exterminated due to relentless European colonization, disease, and slavery. The culture of these people, their language, their religion, their jokes and songs, and so on have been lost to time. All that remains is what they left behind in the soil, and on the windswept grasslands, the swaying forests, and the flowing marshes. Though this culture of mound builders lasted quite a while, roughly 4,000 years, from 220 BC to 1800 AD, it outlasted the city-state of Sumer, the Babylonian Empire, and the woolly mammoth. This civilization was born during the Bronze Age. The first city-states were being established, and died at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. The environmental history of Uruguay goes hand in hand with its people. Beginning in the late Pleistocene, from 13,000 BC to 8,000 BC, it was a cool and dry climate due to the ice encroaching from the Andes, the ice encroaching from the southern continent, and the cooler world climate due to the large Euro, Asian, American ice sheet covering the northern parts of the globe. In the early Holocene beginning 8000 BC to 3380 BC, the land became warmer and wetter following the retreat of the glaciers. In the middle Holocene, the land became seasonally dry, fluctuating between various dry and wet periods, but allowed for the growth of various wetland and marshy areas. It dried out the prairies, not allowing for these grasslands to be recharged with water. With the late Holocene beginning in 2000 BC to the present day, there have been little changes to the environment of Uruguay. Following the end of the Middle Holocene, the drying climate caused less water to recharge the grasslands, causing minor droughts, making hunting and gathering on the grasslands unsustainable, but making the wetlands far more attractive. Typically, wetlands are seen as a nasty place, filled with mosquitoes and being constantly flooded, and making any inhabitant constantly wet. Though while we may view marshlands and swamps as distasteful, they are incredibly attractive areas, filled with fish, frogs, edible insects, navigable waterways, infinite amounts of sediment, fertile soil, grass, and clay. Surrounded by forests, and nearby to various ecological environments, the marshes and swamps of Uruguay offered a bountiful land. People began inhabiting freshwater areas with close access to differing environments and chose areas safe from seasonal flooding. These communities went from a hunting and gathering lifestyle in the plains to starting a farming culture in the marshes of the southern cone. These settlements began building mounds for a multitude of reasons. They were built to get away from the marshy wet ground, to keep raised fields, to act as burial mounds for great leaders or significant individuals, and to keep the population away from severe flooding. These early mounds were often built in short bursts, being created in circular, elliptical, and horseshoe patterns, often being clustered together for protection. Though these mounds were not made by one group alone, but rather various communities of differing ethnicities using the same mound technology, similar to the Mississippian mounds of North America. Archaeologically speaking, there isn't much left of this civilization to go off of, and research has seldomly been conducted in contrast to mound societies of the Mississippi River. For the most part, this topic is unknown, neglected, and often poorly misunderstood. The culture as of now is known as the formative culture, their true name being lost to time. It was with the discovery, research, and investigations of these mound-building societies that it was realized the former indigenous inhabitants practiced agriculture, scholars believing previously that Europeans had only introduced agriculture to the area. In total, there are well over 3,000 mounds spread out across Uruguay and southern Brazil, with many appearing alongside rivers, lagoons, and marshes. These mounds are called aterros or tesos in Portuguese, and Cerritos de Indios in Spanish. Some of the more famous sites being located along the lagoons, such as the Negro Lagoon, the Castillos Lagoon. The construction of these mounds would vary, with some taking centuries to evolve into mounds the size of an American football field, with often a height of 7 meters, and others taking decades, and some only taking 5 years. These mounds come across in various shapes and sizes, and were often haphazard at the beginning of these mound-building constructions, though over time, these mounds became planned constructions, often resulted in circular mounds with a public plaza surrounded by residential and ceremonial spaces on the side. Mounds began being constructed in the pre-ceramic mound period, from 2200 BC to 1000 BC. In this time, the inhabitants began domesticating crops, beginning with corn and squash on raised fields, and later expanding the variety of crops to tubers, roots, palm nuts, and beans. This period led to increasing social complexity and the rise of early chiefdoms, allowing local leaders to pool manpower together more so than any hunter-gatherer societies could. This period also reflected a change in the idea of the afterlife for many of these communities, with the beginning of burials and the burying of grave goods and domesticated dogs with certain individuals. Over time, these burials would become more complex, with a variety of burial traditions being practiced, such as primary burials, secondary burials, and possibly ritualistic cannibalism. Various bone fragments, especially those of fingers and toes, being found buried in the mounds, with often scrape marks on them. Over time, the amount and detail of the grave goods began to increase, with bone and stone tools, ceramics, food, and animal teeth accompanying the deceased. Houses were constructed of mud, made with straw roofs and wooden posts. These are called torreras in Spanish. When a house became too old, it would be collapsed, and a new torrera would be built upon it, with additional earth put on top to level the platform, thus increasing the elevation of the mounds with every generation. The longest occupied sites are those with the highest elevations, with the highest being 7 meters. At this time, the local population used corn as a supplement to their diet rather than a main component. These mound-building societies would fish nearby water resources with nets, with evidence for this coming in the form of stone net weights being found nearby mounds. Wild game, such as deer, rabbits, birds, insects, and wild flora, would also be included into their wide diet, making the inhabitants of this area dependent on various resources, and often in great health. Local quartz stone would often be used as stone tools, likely using these quartz stones in the wake of better lithic resources nearby. Though these communities were able to easily trade food surplus with neighboring communities for better stone, using the nearby rivers and Atlantic coastline as superhighways, capable of carrying vast quantities of food via canoe. Local stone would be used for grinding, often creating portable grinding rocks, such as manos and matates. These could be used to grind the husks of palm nuts off and to grind corn. The next period for this intriguing society is the Ceramic Mound period, beginning 1000 BC, lasting till 400 or 800 AD, differing gaps in time based on significant events in their society. In 1000 BC, ceramic pottery begins to become more commonly found across and within many of the mounds. These ceramics are often elaborate at first, depicted with various geometric designs, and becoming more utilitarian and bland over time, a sign of the growing necessity for expedient and practical pottery to fit a growing population. These ceramics would often be used for storing food, water, and the trade. Following 400 AD, the production of corn was intensified, likely to feed a growing population, and with more wild foods being reserved for a minor elite that was beginning to emerge. During this time, the notion of territory begins to take place, with a possible increase in warfare and raiding being associated with this, along with the growing of distinct and separate populations. This notion of territory, likely stemming from the continuous permanent settlement, rising social complexity, and warfare with neighboring tribes and chiefdoms. It is during this time the famous Uruguayan tribes begin their roots. The Charrua, the Genoa, the Chana, and Araucan beginning in this mysterious age. These societies would routinely trade, ally, and go to war with each other. The last flourishing of this society is the post-ceramic period, lasting from 400 to 800 AD to 1750 AD. During this final era, the number of mounds constructed began to decrease, beginning in 800 AD. There are varying theories for this, although my own theory is that as the population began to rely more on corn, and as a drought or ecological crisis began to occur, without sufficient corn, there was not enough wild game and supplemental crops to feed all the populace, thus the people disbanded and abandoned their mounds and spread out across the region, either moving into new areas or returning to a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, although there are varying other theories with equally logical explanations, citing warfare, ecological collapse, and possibly new religions. Though this did not destroy their culture, but only weaken it. The Europeans would deal the final blow. Warfare with neighboring tribes with European weaponry, European disease, war with the Spanish and Portuguese settlers, European slave raids, and colonization by Europeans, who often took the best land, and the destruction of their vital crops from escaped cattle, goats, and pigs. The last mounds were built in 1750 before the Spanish power was truly solidified in the region. Though the natives are not all gone, some trace genetics remain in the population, about 8%, though this does disprove the previous theory believing that all the natives had gone extinct. It is likely a few natives survived the entire colonization and extermination by the various Spanish and Uruguayan governments. However, it is also just as likely that many of these were native women, bearing mixed children with Europeans, often under tragic circumstances. Though the people that inhabited the mounds, their religion, their society, and their culture are gone, the descendants they leave behind live today. Thank you for watching. and please subscribe to this channel.